The title of this morning's discussion is The Little Things. Now, with a title like that, The Little Things, maybe this will be a short message. I don't know, we will see. One of the things I was reflecting on recently is how much we underestimate sin by its size. What do I mean by that? It strikes me that most, I'm not going to say all, but most things in terms of our actions and decisions that we make, whether they be for good or for bad, have a tendency to start small. I remember a friend of mine once, long time ago, made a statement to me. He said, if you do something dishonest, the worst possible thing that could ever happen to you is you get away with it. And what he meant by that, and in our conversation, is he said that because when you get away with something small, you're going to do it again, only a little bit bigger. If you think about when we hear about individuals who embezzle large sums of money or do dishonest things, so often it starts that they do something very small, maybe something that you would, in the scale of things or scheme of things, you would consider really not that big of a deal. But that little act led to a second act, to a third, to a fourth, and to a fifth. And every time, kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit more. Now, I'm not accusing anyone here of any multi-million-dollar company embezzlement or anything like that, but I think it has strong implications to our spiritual life. It's very easy in our walk with Christ is to say, oh, it's not a big deal that I do this over here because it's not like I'm doing this large sin over there. But the reality is that the big sin tends to be from the little sin built up. So often when things are not dealt with when they're smaller, it's a lot harder to deal with them, isn't it? I'll use my own perfectly manicured, beautiful lawn as an example. And anyone who's seen my house knows that I am not giving an accurate description. I am not one of these people who feels the necessity to have a property that could grace the covers of Home and Gardens. My philosophy when it comes to mowing the lawn has been a little bit more along the lines of, well, as long as it's not tall enough that anyone can call the state on me, I'm okay. But what I have noticed, and I can't say myself anymore now that my boys are at the age that they're able to push the mower, is that the more you kind of ignore the grass and you let it go another day, when you go to mow it, it gets to the point where it is so much more work to deal with it. The grass can get to the height, especially if you're dealing with a push mower, that if you go over it, if your platform's too low, it jams everything up, it stalls and everything else, and you got to mow over it, then you got to go back and so on and so forth. But if you mow the lawn before it gets to that point, it's a lot easier to deal with. And just a few days makes a huge difference. Same thing with those pesky weeds, which I got to tell you, if ever I find out who it is who keeps planting these weed seeds in my yard, because I don't plant any weed seeds, but yet I still get weeds. I don't get it. But that was a joke. Feel free to laugh. But same thing with those weeds and dealing with them. The longer you ignore them, the longer they go, the deeper those roots get. But if you deal with them right away, or even preemptively, and stop them from growing or taking root to begin with, life's a lot easier, isn't it? Well, I think the same thing, again, applies to our spiritual life. Those things that have the potential to derail us start tiny. Oh, last night was kind of late night. I really need my sleep. Not a big deal if I miss church today. I know. I haven't read the Bible for a while, but I'll make up for it later. I'll double my Bible reading tomorrow that I missed today. Not a big deal, just a little thing. It's not like I'm not going to get into heaven because I missed a single Bible reading, etc. All these little things. Oh, I'll look at that unsavory material. It's not like I'm out having an affair. Those little things. Well, as I said, I was kind of really reflecting upon these things. In his book by Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, he references dragons. He uses dragons as the imagery, and he points out it's easier to slay a small dragon than a giant dragon. We need to slay our dragons when they're small. Don't let them get so big. And so I would like to draw everyone's attention to Luke chapter 16, verse 10 through 12. Now, this is a very short reading that is kind of plucked out of Luke chapter 16. And as always, I would like to encourage you to go back and read the full chapter. Read today's scripture in its full context, because there's even more to it than what I'm going to be able to get into this morning. Today, I'm kind of honing in on a single fundamental principle. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. It's a very simple statement. And if you think about it, it's very obvious. If you had someone who maybe watched your house for a weekend, and you came back and everything was in perfect order, you even left in a little bit of a hurry. They even took the time and washed your dirty dishes, and the mail was organized and seated, waiting for you. The pets were fed, and so on and so forth. And you had a trip coming up that you needed someone to watch your house again. How likely are you to say, hey, you know what? You did a great job that weekend. Hey, would you mind watching the house for a week or two? You probably feel fairly comfortable with that, wouldn't you? Now, let's say someone else watched your house one weekend. You show up, the mail is falling out of the mailbox. The dishes that you accidentally left in the sink has your white dishes are now green from the mold. And your pet is dehydrated and starving because and and you say to them, "Hey, what happened?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I got busy. I didn't get over to your house. I'll make it up to you. Really sorry about that. But hey, I know that you're going away for a couple of weeks next month. I'll cover your house then." What's your response going to be? And you're like, "No, we're good. That's okay." It's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? But yet again, what's our attitude in our spiritual walk with God? How often is it that we want God to activate and do things in our lives and so on and so forth, but yet how faithful are we being in our mere mortal walk that God should do anything with us in our spiritual? I'm reminded of and see if I can get this quote right. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. I would take that and expand it and say integrity is doing the right thing even when doing the right thing doesn't seem to matter. It's doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Same thing is true. Lack of integrity is doing the wrong thing, thinking it doesn't matter. See, a lot of times, and this is how we, I think, live our life. And I think a lot of believers, our brothers and sisters in Christ, often make this same mistake. A lot of times people say, "Oh, well, there's certain lines I won't cross. I won't. I may do this, that, and the other, but I won't cross that line." I think we need to have a different philosophy about that line. We need to have more of an attitude of somewhere out there, there's a line, but I'm not getting anywhere near it. Because I'll tell you the thing about lines. I think the closer you get to the line, the blurrier it gets. And we need to stay as far away from that line as we can. Verse 11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Now, what true riches are we talking about? We're talking about spiritual riches. See, I believe what's being presented before us is that in our spiritual walk with Christ, how we conduct ourselves day to day matters. Being individuals of good character here and now matters. It has a far greater impact on our spiritual life than I think we realize. It is sad to say that I have met many believers over the years who the word praise the Lord is on their lips, but I don't see it reflected in how they conduct themselves day in and day out. You see, and I've talked about this before, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I've talked before about habits. And we all have habits. we all do things a certain way. We all have different habits. There's things that we do without even thinking. Yesterday morning, my wife and I we were out on the road, and I was driving, and I was taking a particular route as we were out running errands, and that particular route that I was on happened to be the same route that I usually take to go to church. So while we're driving along, I'm having a conversation with my wife. She says to me, "Where are you going?" And I realized I made a wrong turn. I was driving to church because that's that habit I have that's ingrained in my system. I just automatically did. I wasn't even thinking about it. I wasn't planning. I wasn't making every decision. It was such a habit that when I'm on that particular road, I make a right turn because that's the route that I go to church. And what I needed to do is needed to make a left turn. The habits that we have ingrained in our system dictate how we live more than we realize. And so those little things we do have an incredible impact on every aspect of our lives. And we cannot go through our life as believers simply saying, "Oh, I'm saved by grace, so it doesn't matter what I do." No, yes, we are saved by grace. But once we're saved by grace, how we conduct ourselves, the decisions we make day in and day out, is so vitally important. Because if we are not conscious of how we rule the flesh, we are putting our spirits in danger. Right now, in this country and really in the Western world and globally, we have some major issues with a lot of immoral material going across the internet, on our TVs, and everywhere. We have young people becoming addicted to different images, and I know I'm speaking a little bit in code, but I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. How on earth did we get here as a society? That there is stuff that is just put out there that I remember when I was a kid, that was totally unacceptable. I believe it's because we allowed those little things to slide. And those little things, because people always want to push the edge, always want to push the boundaries. And we got to get away from that edge. Verse 12. And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Now, this is kind of funny, dealing with this verse, because I know, and this is just how I am. I have a tendency to be a little bit extra careful with other people's property. In fact, I probably sometimes treat other people's things better than my own. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, library books. If I get a book from a library, right now I'm actually reading a book on at home who a friend of mine has loaned me, and I had that book with me when I was on vacation a few weeks ago. And every time I would go down to the beach, I took that book and I put it like in a Ziploc bag and was like very careful with it. And every time every time like I paused, it was kind of like I was super careful with it and everything else. I didn't want anything to happen to that book because it belonged to my friend. Trust me, if it was my book, I probably wouldn't have been that careful. If it got a little bit wet, I would have been, okay, whatever. But it's important that we treat these things with a certain amount of respect. Because if I came back to my friend with the book damaged, what does that do to my friendship with that friend? Now, accidents happen. I'm not trying to get nitpicky. Accidents happen, but I'm talking about being respectful. And so want to just kind of make one other point with verse 12. If you have been trustworthy with someone else's, if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And I kind of thought about that, and I thought, is there a greater implication here? And so I want to put out one more thing, food for thought, and then I'll try to wrap this up. And this is probably, actually, I'll be honest, probably this is going to end up being the shortest message I ever delivered. And the congregation all said, amen. But if we think about stewardship, we think about how we treat worldly things. I do not for a second believe that we should ever treat worldly things as idols, in terms of they are not, we need to have all things in proper perspective. There are far more important things in life than worldly things. And people who chase after worldly things end up in a lot of spiritual trouble. With that said, who owns everything ultimately? According to a sheet of paper, my truck outside belongs to me. According to another sheet of paper, my house belongs to me. According to my marriage certificate, I belong to my wife. And her to me. It's a two-way street, people. But ultimately, who does it all actually belong to? God. Who do we belong to? God. If everything belongs to God, it kind of strikes me that means all the decisions and how we conduct ourselves in every aspect of our lives is a direct reflection of our attitude towards God. And so I just want to wrap things up with this. Good habits only happen by doing good things. I referenced yesterday how I made that right turn out of habit because I started going as if I was going to church. Well, that habit only got there because every Sunday morning I am at that intersection and I make that right turn. Good habits only happen by doing good things. Not great things, not huge things. A single decision to do one nice thing or one good thing does not all of a sudden change your behavior. But those little decisions, same thing with the bad decisions. They start with the little things, the little temptations. You purchase something and someone gives you, the cashier gives you the wrong amount of change. They actually give you more than they should have. Are you automatically returning that money saying, I'm sorry, you know what? You counted that out wrong. You gave me a little bit too much. May seem like a little thing to just turn a blind eye and say, oh, that was on them. That was their mistake, not mine. I'm not being dishonest. Yes, you are. May seem like a little thing, but if that little thing doesn't bother you, then that's going to lead to a big thing. But if you stop and say, you know what, my friend, you gave me a 10 instead of a 5, and you give it back to them, you just sowed the seed of a good habit. That is integrity. I'll give one last example. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. But, and I may have shared this story before, and if you're hearing this for a second time, I do apologize. But I was, my family and I were at a place in Hockessin called The Well. And great burgers, by the way. And it's a Christian organization, which I always like to support organizations because their profits go towards missionary work. So we're there, and or ministry. I don't know specifically missionary, but it supports a ministry. And I was there with my family, and in the hecticness of me placing my order, my wife placing her order, the kids placed their order, so on and so forth. We placed all these orders, and so on and so forth. When we sit down to eat, we noticed we were missing fries, and particularly, I believe they were sweet potato fries. And if you know my wife, having those sweet potato fries, and my daughter too, well, this is very important. So if you order sweet potato fries, my goodness, you better get them. And so I went up and I said, hey, listen, we're missing our sweet potato fries. And they went to the back and they said, oh, I'm sorry about that. And they got the sweet potato fries, and they came out and they gave us our sweet potato fries. And we had a good meal, and so on and so forth. So later, after we left, when I was home, I was going through my pockets, going through my evening routine, my little habits, because my keys go here, my wallet goes there, so on and so forth. I have my little wooden box that everything goes in. And I look at the receipt, and I read it, and I thought, son of a gun, they didn't charge us for those sweet potato fries. We must have messed up our order, and they gave us those sweet potato fries, and we didn't pay for them. And it bugged me. And I was like, oh man, now I feel really bad. So a few weeks went by, and I was in there for another reason. It wasn't the whole family, and I don't remember if my wife was with me or not, but I was in there, and I think I may have been getting a cup of coffee or something, and I said to them, listen, I owe you money. I said, a few weeks ago, I was in here with my family, and we thought that you forgot our sweet potato fries, and it turns out you didn't. We never paid for it, but you gave us sweet potato fries. So please charge me for sweet potato fries now, so that I can pay you what I owe you, but I don't need the fries. The guy looked at me, and his jaw practically hit the floor. He was very taken back. He said, I have been doing this working here for years, you are the first person to ever come back and try to pay for something that you got for free. He said, I refuse to accept your money for the sweet potato fries. Thank you for your honesty. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but it's just one of those things that sticks out in my mind, because I have to ask myself, all right, I reflect, by making that decision that I had to pay for those sweet potato fries, what did that do for me? And then I thought about it. I thought, I wonder how this impacted that gentleman. That tiny little decision, sweet potato fries. I mean, like probably $5. This was a few years ago. It wasn't as expensive as everything is now. Not a big deal. But yet at that moment, what did that one little thing do in that whole dynamics? I don't know. But I do know this. It was a small decision that I believe helps support a good habit. And so remember the title of today's message, and here's what I hope you take away from this, and this is kind of a roundabout way of finally getting back to where I started. You know, and you're probably like, yeah, Pastor, you probably could take, if you took your conclusion and put it at the beginning, we could all get out of here early. But I think an important thing to remember, because I think a lot of us aspire to do good things in the world. At least I hope so. I really genuinely hope so. But if we're going to do that, we need to remember doing good starts and ends with the little things. God bless.